middle school. I miss all of you. I hope you're all doing well in this crazy time that we're all living in. One advantage is I've always kind of wanted to show you all my studio. So I'm here on the 3rd floor of my house, and let's go check it out. So as some of you know, I'm a portrait painter and also a children's book illustrator, and this is where I do my work. So I have a pastel I'm working on right now, a portrait of Abby making a flower chain. I have my pastels all laid out, kind of organized by color when I want to work. I can just pull that out. This is what one of my finished pastels looks like. And have a nice view, especially this time of year, of the flowering trees in our yard. There's a dogwood tree and a cherry tree in the neighbor's yard. So, and this is where we've done some block printing in the past, or I've shown you block printing. This is where I do my block printing when I want to work. That's another sort of facet to the art that I make. So today I'm going to be teaching you art lesson from my studio. And we're going to be doing some spring tree watercolors. So this time of year, I hope that even though we're all have to keep a distance from each other, that you are getting outside. It's so comforting to see the beauty of nature around us. It reminds us of God's eternal care for us, that even though we're dealing with COVID-19, spring still comes. And so I wanted to look at this particular painting by the artist George Ennis called Spring Trees in Montclair, New Jersey. It's an especially beautiful piece, and it really spoke to me because it made me feel or think about a lot of what we're going through right now, that it's spring, it's beautiful, but there's this feeling of there being a storm. You can see that maybe a storm has just either come in or has just left. There's an atmospheric quality to the painting. It might remind us a little bit of the Impressionists that we've studied, in terms of the artist is really trying to create a feeling and a mood and a sense of atmosphere with these beautiful flowering trees. And so I've included in your lesson one of my favorite poems. It's a little bit of a complicated poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins, who was a monk around the turn of the century. And basically the idea in the first paragraph is God's grandeur is never changing, it's eternal, and despite all that we as human beings go through. So despite our suffering and our difficulties, it says, and for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights of the black west went, O morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with a warm breast and with bright wings. So there's still the beauty of nature to comfort us, and we can see God's goodness in it. So your first part of this assignment is to go out, if you can, in your backyard. Take a photo of a flowering tree you might see, or hopefully maybe if you get out on a hike with your family, take a picture of a beautiful flowering tree. The Japanese, for example, have a whole celebration this time of year called Hanami, flower viewing, where everyone goes out together to enjoy the beauty of the spring trees. Once you have a photo you like, and also if it's hard to get out, you can just do like a quick internet search. You just go to open up a window and type in cherry blossom trees, and hopefully maybe you can find an image you like and print it out. If you do end up choosing an image from the internet, make sure that you change it a little bit. It's because of copyright. And then I want you to think about creating that kind of moody atmosphere that we saw in our lesson. Let me pull it up. In Innes's painting. So think about, we're going to be talking about working wet into wet to create the sky in our piece and creating this kind of atmospheric feeling of perhaps a storm either coming or leaving. So you might want to pull up some images of skies that you find interesting. I really want to see in this piece a really interesting sky. It could be sunset, it could be dawn. Think about what you want to work with in terms of that. So, with watercolor, as you all know, you want to start out with just a really nice pencil drawing. You want to think about getting in, just as I've been teaching you all this year, kind of the general elements of your piece before getting too detailed. So I'm going to draw this rock outcropping here. I've drawn in the trunk of my tree. I'm kind of drawing these branches going off. With trees, the key to drawing them successfully is to remember that the trunk is always the thickest part, and the branches get thinner and thinner as you go up. And remember, this is just practice. It's not going to come out perfect. We practice drawing like you would practice a sport, and you don't get good at it unless you practice. And so for the sake of this lesson, I have kind of a busy background in this photograph. So I'm just going to maybe not worry about that too much. And I'm not going to include these trees in the background. I'm going to leave my sky kind of open. And I'm going to create kind of these masses for the blossoms because a key to this lesson is making sure that I'm going to leave the areas where I want to have my blossoms white when I do my sky. So I'm just kind of roughing these in here. You can spend a little more time hopefully making some more details. But if you want to start out this general too, it's fine. You just want to think about sort of masses of blossoms rather than getting stuck on each little individual blossom. You can always go back and add those later on. So for the sake of time, I'm going to show you this wet into wet technique. Now, hopefully all of you have watercolors. If you didn't have a chance to get any yet, you can do this in colored pencil. It'll, have a different effect, but feel free to use colored pencil or whatever sort of colored medium you have. But hopefully we can do this wet on wet technique. So I am going to, one thing you really want to start thinking about now that you're in middle school, you want to make sure you're not just using these colors straight from your paint box. Like, you don't want to just be like, okay, so here's a green, got the green grass and the blue sky and the brown tree trunk. I really want you to, that sort of, simple thing can be fun and all, but I really want you to instead to think about mixing your colors to make some interesting new ones. And you always want to have a paper towel handy when you're watercoloring. And you can use this area here for color mixing. If these colors start to get dirty, you can always, I just wet my paper towel and I'm going to wipe this out because there's a little bit of orange and green in there. So you can always clean it if it gets dirty. Clean this with a little water. So I'm going to start. And yeah, hopefully maybe you even have some, a different grade of watercolor palette. If you have like the watercolors that come in the tube that I've shown you before, those are great too. And then you could have a larger, maybe a plastic plate that you're mixing colors on. So I'm going to start off and I'm going to make my sky. I'm going to add a little more black. So I want it to be a little stormy like Innes's sky in his painting. And notice that I'm creating a nice wash. I'm working relatively quickly, but I'm going around wherever my spring blossoms are. I'm going to leave those white. And the fun thing about working wet into wet with watercolor, well, first I want to make sure I get some of this shade all the way around, and my watercolor is still wet. I can add, I'm going to mix a little black in, and it's going to start kind of making these moody kind of patterns, like maybe I have like some moody clouds in the background. So I'm adding this dark cloud here. And notice how, because the paper is wet, the black is just naturally kind of blending in. And then if you wanted to even make sure there is an area that's white, you can take your clean paper towel and maybe even dab out some white for that storm cloud. But it can make some really beautiful, interesting effects working wet into wet. So once I have that, I also want to make sure that there are some shadows in my piece and that they are relatively similar, that there's some of the sky reflected in my shadows. So the shadow of this tree and its trunk, I'm going to add a little blue. And when I'm going to well, maybe I'll dab at this, because just for the sake of time, I could wait and let that dry and go over it with the brown of the tree trunk, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to worry with that. And I have some water in my painting water can be, or in my photo, painting water can be a little more complicated. I think this time I'm just going to make some grass, just for the sake of keeping our lesson consistent. I'm going to mix some green with a little black, and notice I'm mixing right into that sort of moody blue that I had for the sky, and having all the colors kind of related to each other like that can create this unified feeling to your piece. So maybe this is the hill in the background. It's kind of going to be this dark green. And maybe this part of the grass where this tree is going to be kind of that color. And then maybe just like with Ines' painting here, we have some areas that are kind of a yellowy green, which I might have to, it always helps to have a little scrap of watercolor paper to help you see the colors that you are mixing, or see how they'll come up on the paper.